Mellow greetings, engineers. Bob here. I had absolutely nothing relevant to say during the original recording, so Editor Bob will be stepping in here. I like the philosophy of having an escape ship for these little adventures be a large grid ship, but try to make it as small and practical as possible. One of the philosophies I want to utilize for this design is having a connector up front, and that way it could potentially connect to any of the NPC stations that are scattered around the universe here. And I like that idea just because I kind of want these ships to be able to fit in with what's going on. So that's why I have that connector low and up front. And hopefully these designs that I'm putting on the side here, little defense for my ship, these two cannons up front, hopefully they are not too wide to prohibit my ship from landing on some of the platforms. It is inevitable because those little winglets are going to get winglets of their own, so it'll be a little less manageable, but if I can get into some of the landing pads, then that'll be good for me. This ship will be hydrogen powered and hydrogen fueled, so only hydrogen thrusters, which means the entire thing will have to be conveyored appropriately for the ship to actually work, which is fine with using those cannons up front because everything needs to be piped anyways. The ship I'm basing this off of is the Cutlass from the Star Citizen game. If you haven't had a chance to check that out, it's pretty cool. It's very beautiful. Here I'm trying to put in some of the larger blocks. The jump drive is a critical component for this ship, and as such, it is going to need to be placed early so I can build around it. And that's one of the more difficult things about this game, is that I have to make sure that I've got proper connections and conveyor junctions going everywhere. Placing the conveyor junctions to power my hydrogen thrusters will be a bit annoying because I've got to connect from the front to the rear, and with the massive jump drive in the way, we'll have to wrap the little nacelles around the jump drive, and that's precisely what I'm doing here. It takes a bit of trial and error, and I'll have to rework where I put some things because I need to also bulk out the body of the ship a little bit, make sure everything is going to look pretty decent. Later on, I'll end up replacing most of these conveyor junctions with cargo containers, as this is supposed to be a bit of a cargo ship that I'm making, and that way it can actually have some cargo capacity. Ideally, I'd like to have large cargo containers when I'm building these ships. It just makes inventory management so much easier when everything is in one place, as opposed to being strewn around the ship in numerous cargo containers that I don't know the exact location of. And while that's not really a big issue because the ship's performance won't matter that much, still having everything in a balanced load is something that I want to go for in a general design principle. Here I'm starting to flesh out the nacelles a little bit. One of the interesting things about the Cutlass from Star Citizen is that these nacelles will actually rotate down and up to give you more lift when necessary. However, the ship will be far too small to make a rotating nacelle. You can achieve something similar with just a freely rotating nacelle, and that can be done with some scripts. However, on the public servers, we have no scripts, and Also, with the constant jankness of the game and having subgrids, that is not necessarily something that we want to try to do. To have the merge blocks merge and unmerge as the nacelles rotate through, that will give us a little more strength in the design. As it rotates through, you won't be able to do any inputs for it because you cannot command the subgrid. Once the nacelle gets back into the lock position, that will make the ship one grid again, and that will make you be able to send commands to the nacelles. In this ship, I'm going for more of an aesthetic look, so all of the thrusters have to be put into these two nacelles, and with their size and position, I need to make sure that they're slightly elevated because the nacelles are going to be kind of roundish themselves, knowing that the thrusters are going to poke out from wherever they are, which makes this a bit bigger than its Star Citizen counterpart there. I also need to make sure that I will have not just enough space for the forward and backwards, but the lateral thrust is something that is often neglected in ships. So I ended up grinding these down a couple of times just to make sure they got expanded to the right size to have just enough lateral thrust. Two in either lateral direction seems to be good enough. It's pretty easy to get in a lot of forward thrust. That tends to be what you want to use most of anyways. But in these cargo ships, I also like to have plenty of up thrust because that's going to enable me to take off. Having enough thrust and up and forward is going to give me the ability to take off in most situations. Using enough gyro, I can actually tilt the ship up and have that two-directional thrust there. So I can have the forward 8 thrusters and the downward thrusters all helping me out to get to where I'm going. The downside of that is that I will have to rock the ship back and probably damage something if I'm in a very heavy gravity or if I'm just going too fast. So always keep your ship design in mind and how it's going to function. I always like to have more than enough thrust because overpowered is underrated as far as thrust goes, as far as I'm concerned. And that's also why I like to use the hydrogen thrusters. I do like the in-game kind of feel that it's spaceship fuel of the future. Everything can run on hydrogen, and then you use some other material for the jump drives. That's kind of why I want that. Using hydrogen gives consistent thrust output in space vacuums or on planets, so that way I don't have to worry about mixing and matching 2 or 3 different kinds of thrusters. I can just do whatever I want. Once I get more of the frame of that ship fleshed out, I can start adding a little more details to the wings and start carving off some pieces to put in more of the functional blocks. Being a hydrogen-fueled ship, it will of course need hydrogen tanks. And since this one will not be utilizing a large hydrogen tank, which would give it ample amount of fuel, I'm going to have to keep carving out little pieces here and there to put these smaller hydrogen tanks wherever I can. Hydrogen tanks are going to be extremely volatile, so I kind of want to keep them away from stuff, but with this being a small ship, I don't really have that choice. I'm also trying to go for aesthetic looks in here, so many of the placeholder conveyor junctions that I put in will have to be carved out for things like the armored components to get the proper piping throughout the ship, and also to give that finished look as far as the ship goes. That's another reason why you want to keep the hydrogen tanks away from exterior places, unless they actually fit in there really nicely for the aesthetic look. Here I kind of put them in the wings, and that's okay. I can put a little bit of armor plating over those, not only for just a little bit of protection, but kind of obscures what's there as well. As I go throughout the ship, I'll continue replacing conveyor junctions or other blocks with the armored components, or maybe even just rerouting things altogether based upon the new frame design I have. Some of the components that I do need to be cognizant of are the gyroscopes. Gyroscopes are nice that it really doesn't matter what orientation they are, and they'll all kind of work together. So anywhere I've got one free block worth of space, I know I can stick a gyroscope in there and be okay. Ditto with the batteries. Batteries can kind of fit in wherever, so they are kind of a later thought, but still something that I need to think of. The bigger blocks are ones I like to put in first. So if I have a large cargo container or a large hydrogen tank, those will want to go in early. Ditto with that jump drive, and then I can start putting in some of these other functional blocks that I absolutely need, such as the hydrogen tanks, oxygen tanks, also very important. The front of the ship I had an assembler because I always like having an assembler on these ships. Since they're doing cargo runs, I will often carry various materials with me, so I get to do one of the acquisition quests. I will just build whatever I need on the spot if I don't have it, and then complete that contract. Shaping the nacelles is an interesting task because I don't have all of the shapes that I want, and I just kind of have to work with what I have here. And these will undergo some changes as we move along, and I'm sure once I get this into the creative mode, I'll finalize some other shapes once I have a bit more time to look at it and see what feels it goes in the right place or otherwise. As far as the blending of everything together, some of the blocks are pretty intuitive, and they'll be sequentially set in the block menu itself with the plus, and as you use the middle mouse button to roll over them, you kind of increment through the shapes that flow from one to the next. I wish the lighting were more powerful in this game, but performance reasons kind of dictate why it can't always be. Uh, but I would definitely love some forward lighting on this that is able to project a good ways. Kind of the whole purpose of having a ship with landing lights is that you can project them far enough away. More than the 10 meters would be nice, because by the time I get to 10 meters in bad weather, I've probably crashed into something. But there are a number of other indicators that you can use to avoid that as well, such as the elevation markers that present themselves in the cockpit, and then just generally not flying like a dingus. That can also be a good way not to crash. If you do intend on crashing, however, and want to survive it, then you can always carve off a little piece of your ship to get some extra steel plates if you need them, and kind of build a pillar off of wherever you suspect you'll be impacting. So if you're going nose first or belly first, you can make some pillars off the bottom of your ship and use those to crash into whatever surface. The theory is that those blocks, even if they're not constructed, will absorb a lot of damage and deform and destroy and arrest a lot of the momentum that you have accumulated, making the most of the ship more survivable. So that can always be a good thing if you are attempting wild re-entries or if you've never tested your ship before. And I say that because there are parachutes, however, don't tend to use them, and that's mostly oversight on my part. Parachutes are pretty great. You don't even have to have them connected to the conveyor system for the most part. You can just plug them in wherever, and as long as you can access that port, you can put the canvas in there and they will deploy just fine. So parachutes often overlooked, especially by myself, especially when attempting wild and uncontrolled re-entries. Whenever I start server grand tours and kind of just build a ship that goes to all the planets, like I did at the beginning of the server relaunch, let's say my ships got a little too big, a little too fast as I hauled around all of my materials, and reentry was a bit exciting to the point that I had actually crashed the ship that I was using a couple of times and had to rebuild almost from scratch. So that was pretty interesting. I wish I had a better computer at the time because the poor performance of my machine is also responsible for the downfall of those ships. I have a much nicer computer and am able to do some of this video editing on it now. And the server lag and performance inabilities that I had in the past are a thing of the past, at least for now. Here in the back of the ship, I'm getting a little more shaping going, and kind of see I've created some dead space in there. And that's because I do have some other blocks that I always like to include. Just some of the decorative items that are purely aesthetic. There's absolutely no reason to have a shower or a bathroom in this game because you don't need to. But I do like having those in there for a sense of real world isms on the ship. And this isn't something that you would live in, but might be something that you need a bathroom for in a long haul, or a shower, or a bed, or a little place to stow some things as you're traveling. Kind of think of it as being a long haul trucker cargo ship, but not having to stop along the way at a rest stop. You can just keep going at sublight speed if need be. That's not really something you have to worry about too much in this game, but it is something interesting, especially with the only one jump drive that I've got in here. A lot of times I find that if you are doing cross-server travel, you will want to have like at least 2 jump drives. And that way, as long as your ship isn't fully laden, you can get a good 4,000 kilometers. It should be able to get you from wherever you are to most other locations. At this part, I'm pretty happy with the shape of the ship. I did manage to get most of the ship set up here with the welder, and it's mostly just a matter of managing the different angles and everything. Here I see a visual error where the crane arm looked like it was retracting and it wasn't. You can fix that sometimes by getting in and out of the cockpit, but that's another issue that plagues you on the servers a lot. You do not want to invoke the wrath of Klain, and that can be easily done when you are messing with rotors and pistons and hinges and such. So for that, I'll just leave this with the rest bit of welding, and we'll continue on from there.